He rejected her, called her barren, exiled her to die. 6 years later, King Corvain sent one final cruelty, an invitation to his newborn heir's ceremony so she could watch him celebrate what she could never give him. But when she walked into that throne room, she wasn't alone. 2 children stood beside her, both with jet black hair, both with those unmistakable royal golden eyes. And the court went dead silent, because everyone just realized the barren mate wasn't barren, and the king's firstborn heir isn't first at all. If you want to see Thalira make Corvain regret every choice he ever made, hit that subscribe button for Silver Moon Chronicles right now. Don't let this king win. Subscribe and stand with the rejected mate who's about to rewrite history.
The envelope was thick, embossed with gold and iron, the crest of Stormridge Citadel. It reeked of mountain pine and cold arrogance, sitting on the rough-hewn table of Thalira's forest cabin like a coiled serpent waiting to strike. It wasn't addressed to Alpha Thalira Embervale, the title she'd earned leading the Ashenwood Wolves through blood and survival. It wasn't addressed to the woman who commanded wildfire magic strong enough to burn through steel. It was addressed to the barren flame. Thalira's fingers went white around the edge of the table. Her jaw clenched. Rage, cold, controlled, lethal, simmered just beneath her skin. Her hair, wild and red as fire, caught the dim candlelight. Her eyes, pale as moonstone, stared at the envelope as if she could incinerate it with a glance. She didn't need to open it to know who sent it. Only one man was cruel enough, arrogant enough, to send a message across the Frostveil just to draw blood 6 years later. Mama? Thalira's spine straightened instantly. She turned from the letter as though it had burned her fingers. Kaelen stood in the doorway, small and sleep-rumpled, rubbing his eyes with one fist. At only 5 years old, he was already tall for his age, sharp-featured, black hair wild and untamed. A miniature echo of him. "I'm here, love," she murmured, her voice softening instantly. She crossed the room and brushed his hair back gently. "Go back to bed. It's not morning yet." "Mirael kicked me again," he grumbled, but his gaze was locked on the envelope. His nose wrinkled. "What's that?" "Nothing, Kaelen. Just old business." He didn't look convinced. His eyes, those impossible, damning golden eyes, narrowed with an intelligence far beyond his years. "The unmistakable birthright of the Stormridge royal bloodline." "It smells wrong," he said quietly, suspicion threading through his small voice. "It smells like him." Thalira's blood turned to ice. Her children had never met Corvain Stormridge. She had never spoken his name aloud in their presence. She had buried that part of her past so deep she sometimes convinced herself it had never happened. But blood remembered. Magic remembered. And the shattered mate bond, buried deep in her chest like broken glass, remembered its origin. "Go back to sleep, Kaelen," she said softly, guiding him back toward the small room he shared with his twin sister. "Everything's fine." He hesitated, golden eyes searching her face, but finally nodded and padded back into the darkness. Thalira waited until she heard the creak of the bed, the rustle of blankets. Then she returned to the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Her hand trembled, just once, as she broke the wax seal. "Gold and iron. Wolf and crown. You are hereby commanded by royal decree to attend the naming ceremony of His Royal Highness, Prince of Stormridge, firstborn son and true heir to the throne, born of His Majesty King Corvain Stormridge and Her Majesty Queen Alara Northvale. Your presence is requested to bear witness to the glorious continuation of the royal bloodline, a blessing bestowed only upon the worthy." Her vision blurred for a moment. A command. A summons wrapped in silk and cruelty. But it was the line scrawled at the bottom, in Corvain's sharp, brutal handwriting, that made her breath catch. "Come see what a true Luna provides, Thalira. See the son a worthy queen gave me, and reflect on your own failure." The words hit her like a fist to the ribs. And suddenly, she was no longer in her cabin. 6 years ago. The throne room of Stormridge Citadel. She had been 22, terrified, and desperately in love. The Moonstone Bond had chosen her, a low-ranking she-wolf from a border pack, as the fated mate to the most powerful Alpha King in the mountains. Corvain Stormridge had been magnetic, commanding, untouchable. She thought the goddess herself had blessed her. But after the mating ceremony, everything changed. He grew cold, distant, obsessed with producing an heir to solidify his claim to the throne. And after 6 months, she still wasn't pregnant. He summoned her to the throne room. It was full, every major alpha in the alliance was there. Lord Marcus Greythorn, Lady Seraphine Ashford, her daughter, Thalira, standing beside the throne in a gown that shimmered like frost. Thalira Embervale, Corvain's voice boomed through the hall, void of any warmth. Physician Morholt stepped forward, clutching a scroll like a death sentence. The weasel of a man refused to meet her eyes. "My king," Morholt began, his voice thin and reedy. "I have completed the examination. The bond, she is, barren." The word echoed in the dead silence. Barren. A flawed mate, Lady Ashford whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. A waste of the goddess's gift. Thalira, standing beside her mother, looked at Thalira with a cruel, satisfied smile. Thalira's hands shook. She stepped forward, reaching for Corvain's arm. "No. Corvain, please, it's a lie. I can feel it. The bond is strong. We're meant to." He looked down at her hand on his arm as if she were something filthy. Something beneath him. He shook her off violently. "A barren mate is no mate," he declared, his voice cold enough to freeze the air in her lungs. "She is a curse from the goddess." The hall fell deathly silent. "I, King Corvain Stormridge, reject you, Thalira Embervale, as my mate and my Luna." The bond didn't just break. It shattered. White-hot agony ripped through her chest, her soul, her very bones. She screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure suffering. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the marble floor, clutching her stomach as the court watched in cold, silent judgment. "Guards," Corvain commanded without a flicker of emotion. "Remove this failure from my sight. She is exiled. If she ever sets foot in Stormridge territory again, she dies." Strong hands grabbed her arms, dragged her backward. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The pain was unbearable. The last thing she saw before the door slammed shut was Thalira Northvale sliding her hand into Corvain's arm, her smile sharp as a blade. What Corvain didn't know, what Thalira had barely known herself, was that the nausea she'd felt that morning wasn't from fear. The barren diagnosis wasn't just a lie. It was catastrophic. She had been 6 weeks pregnant. With twins. Present day. The cabin. Thalira stared at the invitation, her hand steady now. Ice-cold clarity settled over her like armor. "Come see what a true Luna provides." He wanted to mock her. To parade his new queen and his precious heir in front of the barren flame he'd discarded. To complete her humiliation in front of the entire kingdom. He had no idea what he was inviting into his throne room. For 6 years, she had survived. She had clawed her way out of exile, through the deadly Frostveil Forest where most wolves died within days. She had awakened wildfire magic from ancient spirits. She had built the Ashenwood Wolves, a rogue pack so fierce that even Corvain's soldiers avoided their borders. And she had raised 2 of the most powerful alpha children the world had ever seen. Kaelen, steady, protective, wise beyond his years. Mirael, sharp, intuitive, magic crackling in her veins like lightning. Both of them bore the golden eyes of the Stormridge bloodline. Both of them carried power that made grown alphas nervous. Thalira stood slowly, the invitation still clutched in her hand. A cold, dangerous smile curved across her lips. "You want to see my failure, Corvain," she whispered to the empty room. She walked to the doorway of the children's room. Kaelen and Mirael were tangled together in sleep, 2 small bodies radiating raw, untamed power even in rest. Her voice dropped to a whisper sharp as moonsteel. "Fine. I'll attend your celebration. Her eyes glinted in the candlelight. Let's see who's humiliated when the sun sets. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles and comment below what time you're watching this. Let's see how many of you are ready to watch Corvain's world burn. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Thalira stood motionless, the invitation still gripped in her hand, her mind racing through 6 years of survival, transformation, and carefully buried rage. She hadn't always been this strong. When the guards had thrown her beyond Stormridge borders, broken and bleeding from the severed mate bond, she had crawled into the Frostveil Forest more dead than alive. The forest was a death sentence, ancient, wild, and merciless. Most exiled wolves died within 3 days. But Thalira had something most didn't. She had 2 lives growing inside her that refused to let her give up. The forest had tested her. Pushed her to the edge of madness. But in her darkest moment, when she'd collapsed against an ancient oak, something had answered her desperation. The Ember Spirits. Beings as old as the forest itself, born of wildfire and moonlight. They had seen her pain, her determination, her refusal to break. And they had offered her a choice, die as the rejected mate, or be reborn as something fiercer. She had chosen fire. They taught her to wield wildfire magic, flames that burned cold and hot simultaneously, that could shield or destroy. They taught her to mask her scent, to hide the royal bloodline pulsing in her children's veins. They taught her to survive. And when her twins were born under a blood moon, screaming with power that shook the trees, the spirits had bowed. By the time Kaelen and Mirael were walking, Thalira had built something Corvain could never have imagined. The Ashenwood Wolves. Rogue wolves, outcasts, and survivors flocked to her banner. She trained them. Led them. Became the alpha they would die for. Within 3 years, even Corvain's border patrols avoided Ashenwood territory. The barren flame had become an inferno. Mama? Thalira turned. Mirael stood in the doorway now, her twin brother behind her. The little girl's golden eyes were wide, sharp with concern that no 5-year-old should possess. You're upset, Mirael said simply. It wasn't a question. The girl's intuition was terrifyingly accurate, stronger even than Thalira's own instincts. I'm fine, little flame, Thalira said softly. You're lying, Kaelen added, stepping beside his sister. Where Mirael was intuitive and quick, Kaelen was strategic and steady. He studied the invitation in his mother's hand with the careful assessment of a born commander. That letter hurt you. Thalira's chest tightened. They were so young, yet already so powerful. Kaelen's protective instincts were growing stronger every day. He'd nearly attacked a traitor last month for speaking harshly to her. And Mirael's magic had accidentally set fire to the training grounds when she'd had a nightmare. Their power was growing too strong to hide. And Corvain's invitation had just made that problem infinitely more dangerous. Go back to bed, Thalira said gently but firmly. Both of you. We'll talk in the morning. The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication only they shared, before reluctantly obeying. Thalira waited until their door clicked shut, then sank into her chair, studying the invitation with cold calculation. This wasn't just mockery. It was bait. Corvain wanted her there, humiliated and broken, so he could parade his perfect life in front of her. But more than that, he wanted her gone. Permanently. An invitation to his citadel, surrounded by his guards, with no allies and no witnesses who cared if the barren reject disappeared quietly after the ceremony. He was planning to erase her. Again. Her jaw set. She couldn't walk into that throne room alone. Corvain's word was law in his territory. He could order her execution the moment she arrived, and no one would stop him. She needed an ally. Someone powerful enough that Corvain couldn't simply eliminate her without political consequences. There was only one option. 3 days later, Thalira stood at the border of Stonecrest territory, having left Kaelen and Mirael in the fierce protection of Kira, her beta. The journey had been long and cold, but necessary. Alpha Julian Thorne was Corvain's rival in every way that mattered. Where Corvain ruled through fear, Julian led through respect. Their territories bordered each other, their packs constantly testing boundaries, their philosophies fundamentally opposed. And Julian had been there that day. In the throne room. The only Alpha whose face had shown not contempt, but fury and pity. She found him in the stone hall of his pack house, standing over a map with his advisors. When the doors opened and she stepped inside, every wolf in the room froze. Julian's head snapped up. His gray eyes widened. "Thalira," he breathed, moving around the table so quickly he nearly knocked it over. "By the goddess. We all thought that I was dead?" Thalira finished, her voice dry. "I'm sure Corvain hoped I was." Julian's advisors exchanged uncertain glances. He waved them away with a sharp gesture. When the room cleared, he turned back to her, his expression torn between relief and disbelief. "How are you alive?" "The Frostveil Forest, no one survives that place." "I had motivation," Thalira said simply. She pulled the invitation from her cloak and laid it on the table between them. Julian read it. His jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. "He's a monster," Julian said quietly, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "To send this to you, even if he thought you were just a broken Omega living in exile, this is unforgivable." "He wants to gloat," Thalira agreed. "Which is why I'm going to accept." Julian's head snapped up. "Thalira, no. It's a trap. He'll kill you the moment you set foot in his citadel." "Not if I arrive as an Alpha under diplomatic protection," Thalira said calmly. "Not if every major pack leader in the Alliance is watching." "Then what's the point?" Julian demanded. "To let him humiliate you in front of the entire kingdom?" Thalira took a slow breath. This was the moment. The secret she'd kept for 6 years, buried so deep that even her own pack didn't know the full truth. "He didn't just reject me, Julian," she said quietly. "He rejected his legacy." Julian went very still. She watched understanding dawn in his eyes, the timeline, the 6-year absence, the reason she'd risk everything to walk back into that throne room. "No," he whispered. "I was pregnant when he exiled me." Julian's hand shot out, gripping the table edge for support. "A child. You have his child." "Children," Thalira corrected, her voice hard as steel. "Twins. A boy and a girl. And they both have his golden eyes." "Goddess almighty," Julian breathed, staggering back a step. "2 heirs. 2 true heirs. They're strong, Julian. Stronger than any Alpha children I've ever seen. Their power is already manifesting. And they're only 5 years old." Julian ran both hands through his hair, his mind clearly racing through the political implications. A king who had rejected his fated mate and his firstborn heirs, twins, in favor of a political marriage. It was a scandal that could shatter the entire alliance. "He called me barren," Thalira said, her voice vibrating with cold fury. "He humiliated me. Cast me out to die. All for Queen Alara and her mother's political power. He chose alliances over destiny." She leaned forward, her moonstone eyes blazing. "And now he wants to celebrate his firstborn heir while I watch. He wants to prove he was right to throw me away." Julian stared at her, seeing not the broken girl from 6 years ago, but the Alpha she had become. "What do you need from me?" he asked quietly. "Come with me," Thalira said. "As my ally. As diplomatic escort from Stonecrest. Under your protection, Corvain can't touch me without starting a war. Not on his own ceremonial day. Not in front of every Alpha in the mountains." Julian was silent for a long moment, weighing the risk, the consequences, the potential for everything to explode. Then a slow, grim smile crossed his face. "He wants to show the kingdom his heir," Julian said quietly. Thalira's smile matched his, cold, dangerous, and absolutely merciless. "Let me show them the real ones." Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles to see what happens when Thalira walks into Corvain's throne room with the heirs he never knew existed. Comment justice if you think he deserves what's coming. The morning of departure arrived cold and sharp, frost clinging to every branch in the Frostveil Forest. Thalira stood in her cabin, laying out clothing with the precision of a general preparing for war. Because that's exactly what this was. "Are these for the ceremony, Mama?" Mirael asked, running her small fingers over the deep midnight blue fabric laid across the bed. "They are," Thalira confirmed, lifting the first garment. Ashenwood ceremonial attire, tailored specifically for this moment. Deep blue like the heart of a flame, with silver embroidery that caught the light like starfire. Accents of amber orange threaded through the hems and collars, the colors of their pack, their survival, their power. "We're really going?" Kaelen asked quietly, standing in the doorway. His golden eyes were serious, far too knowing for a 5-year-old. "We are," Thalira said, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I need you both to be brave. Can you do that for me?" "Always," Kaelen said simply. Mirael nodded, her small jaw set with determination that made Thalira's heart ache. She dressed them carefully, Kaelen in a fitted tunic and trousers, Mirael in a dress that allowed movement but commanded presence. Both outfits bore the subtle mark of the Ashenwood Wolves, a stylized ember wolf embroidered over the heart. When Thalira looked at them, standing side by side, she saw exactly what Corvain had thrown away. Not weakness. Not failure. Destiny. The Ashenwood Wolves assembled at dawn, the entire pack gathering in the clearing outside Thalira's cabin. Banners rose, deep blue fabric snapping in the cold wind, the ember wolf sigil blazing against the morning light. 50 wolves stood at attention. Some in human form, others shifted, massive creatures with eyes that glowed like coals. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, ancient trees bending slightly as if in grudging respect. Kira, Thalira's beta, stepped forward. The scarred warrior's face was grim. "The escort is ready, Alpha," she said quietly. "But I still think this is a mistake." "Noted," Thalira said, adjusting the ceremonial cloak around her shoulders, midnight blue with flames embroidered along the edges. "But we're going anyway." Kira's jaw tightened, but she nodded and stepped back. Julian Thorne arrived at midday with 20 of his finest warriors, all bearing the grey and silver colors of Stonecrest. His presence sent a clear message: Thalira wasn't arriving as a beggar or a reject. She was arriving as an alpha, under diplomatic protection, backed by one of the most powerful packs in the mountains. "Ready?" Julian asked, his grey eyes searching her face. Thalira looked down at Kaelen and Mirael, one on each side of her, their small hands gripping hers tightly. "Ready," she confirmed. The journey to Stormridge Citadel took 3 days, and every mile was heavy with tension. Word spread like wildfire. The Ashenwood Alpha was traveling to the royal ceremony. With Stonecrest protection. With children. Other packs watched from the forests, their scouts tracking the procession with hungry curiosity. Rumors flew faster than ravens. "The barren reject is still alive. She's built her own pack. She's traveling with Julian Thorne. Why would Corvain invite her? Why would she accept?" Julian rode beside Thalira's wagon, his warriors forming a protective perimeter. Inside, Kaelen sat pressed against the window, watching the landscape with tactical assessment that unnerved even the adult wolves. "He's afraid," Mirael said suddenly, her golden eyes distant. "Who?" Thalira asked. "The king," Mirael whispered. "I can feel it. He's afraid of something, but he doesn't know what yet." Thalira's blood chilled. Mirael's intuition had never been wrong. "Good," Thalira said quietly. "He should be." Stormridge Citadel rose from the mountain like a crown of iron and stone, its towers piercing the grey sky. Massive walls, heavily fortified gates, guards stationed every 50 feet. The seat of power in the high mountains. Cold. Imposing. Designed to intimidate. As their procession approached, the gates swung open slowly, the screech of metal echoing like a warning. Thalira stepped down from the wagon, Kaelen and Mirael flanking her immediately. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked forward. Julian's warriors formed up behind her, a show of strength and solidarity. The courtyard was packed with visiting alphas, nobles, and dignitaries, all dressed in their finest. Conversations died as Thalira entered. Heads turned. Whispers erupted like wildfire. That's her. The rejected mate. She's alive? Who are those children? Look at their eyes. Thalira ignored them all. She walked with the fluid grace of a predator, her children matching her stride perfectly. The Ashenwood ceremonial blue stood out like a flame against the sea of Stormridge gold and iron. She didn't bow. She didn't lower her gaze. She walked like the alpha she had become. Inside the throne room, King Corvain Stormridge stood near the dais, surrounded by advisors and lords. Queen Thalira sat on her throne, a bundle of white fabric in her arms, the heir they would present today. Corvain was speaking to Lord Greythorn when it hit him. A spike of pain. Sharp. Unexpected. Agonizing. He staggered, his hand flying to his chest. The mate bond, the one he'd severed 6 years ago with moonsteel and rage, flared. Like a wound ripped open, screaming, demanding, reaching. Your Majesty? Greythorn asked, concerned. Corvain couldn't speak. His vision blurred. His wolf surged forward, confused and furious. She's here. Impossible. She's dead. She's here. The massive throne room doors began to open, the sound echoing like thunder. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The herald's voice rang out, clear and formal. Presenting Alpha Thalira Embervale of the Ashenwood Wolves, under diplomatic escort of Alpha Julian Thorn of Stonecrest. Corvain's world tilted. The doors opened fully. And there she stood. Thalira. His Thalira. Alive. Radiant. Powerful. Her wild red hair cascaded over her shoulders like living flame. Her moonstone eyes locked onto his with the force of a blade. But it wasn't Thalira who stole every breath in the room. It was the 2 children standing on either side of her. A boy and a girl. 5 years old. Dressed in midnight blue. Holding her hands. Both with jet black hair. Both with sharp, aristocratic features. Both with golden eyes. Unmistakable. Undeniable. The Stormridge royal bloodline burned in their gazes like twin suns. The court gasped. Corvain's goblet slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. Queen Thalira went pale as death. Thalira didn't smile. Didn't gloat. She simply stood there, chin raised, her children flanking her like twin wolves. And in that moment every person in the throne room understood. The barren flame had returned. And she'd brought the heirs Corvain never knew existed. Drop a comment if you saw Corvain's face when those golden eyes walked in. Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. You do not want to miss what happens next. Thalira had taken 3 steps toward the throne room doors when Corvain's voice cracked across the hall like breaking ice. Stop. Every wolf froze. The command in his voice, the alpha authority that had ruled these mountains for years, still carried weight. But Thalira didn't stop. She kept walking, her children flanking her, her spine straight as a blade. Thalira, please, Corvain said, and the desperation in his voice made nobles exchange shocked glances. Kings didn't beg. Kings didn't plead. But Corvain Stormridge was no longer acting like a king. Thalira stopped. Slowly, she turned. Corvain had moved from the throne. He stood in the center of the hall now, his chest heaving, his golden eyes, mirrors of his children's, wild with anguish. His voice broke. He swallowed hard. Let me see them. Just let me look at them. You're looking at them now, Thalira said coldly. I mean truly see them, Corvain said, taking a step forward. Several guards moved instinctively to intercept, but he waved them back. Please. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to look, Thalira said, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade through flesh. The court fell into stunned silence. Corvain flinched as if she'd struck him. Because it was true. Every word was true, and they both knew it. He'd chosen political power over the mate bond. He'd believed a bought physician over his own instincts. He'd thrown away his destiny without a second glance. And now that destiny stood before him, and he had no claim to it. Let me, Corvain's voice cracked again. Let me just touch them. Once. Let me see. He dropped to his knees. The gasp that went through the throne room was like a physical wave. Nobles stumbled backward. Guards stood paralyzed. Julian's eyes widened in shock. An Alpha King. On his knees. Before a rejected mate. It was unheard of. Impossible. World-shattering. Please, Corvain whispered, his hands extended toward the twins. I know I have no right. I know I failed you. But they're mine. They're my children. Please. Thalira said nothing. She simply looked down at Kaelen and Mirael. The choice was theirs. Mirael stared at the kneeling king with her two wise golden eyes. Then she stepped backward, pressing herself against her mother's side, her small face set with rejection so complete it needed no words. Kaelen took one step forward. Corvain's breath caught. Hope flared in his eyes. Then the 5-year-old bared his teeth in a snarl so primal, so full of protective fury, that several nobles actually took a step back. You hurt her, Kaelen said, his young voice steady and cold. You threw her away. You didn't want us. I didn't know about you. You didn't want her, Kaelen interrupted, his voice rising. And she's worth 100 of you. The boy turned his back on his father and returned to Thalira's side. Corvain remained kneeling, his hands still extended toward children who wanted nothing to do with him, his face a mask of devastation. You didn't know because you didn't care to look, Thalira repeated, her voice cold and final. You cared about alliances. About power. About your pride. She gestured to the chaos around them, the exposed lies, the false heir, the corrupted physician. You built your throne on lies and cruelty. And now you kneel before the woman you tried to erase, begging for scraps of the destiny you threw away. The court was so silent, a falling pin would have echoed like thunder. No, Thalira said simply. You don't get to touch them. You don't get to claim them. You had your chance at a family, Corvain. You chose this instead. The political implosion happened in real time. Lord Greythorn stepped away from the throne, his face hard with barely concealed disgust. Your Majesty, he said coldly, we need to discuss the revelations of today. Other alphas murmured agreement, their loyalty visibly fracturing. This is madness. Queen Alara shrieked, shooting to her feet, the false heir still crying in her arms. She's lying. Those children could be anyone's. They have the royal eyes, Lady Blackwood said flatly, her political instincts already calculating new alliances. The scent. The aura. Their Stormridge blood. Denying it makes you look foolish. My daughter is your queen, Lady Ashford snarled. Your daughter is party to treason, Julian interrupted, stepping forward. His grey eyes were ice. You conspired to remove the true mate through false diagnosis. You planted a false heir. That's not just scandal, it's a direct attack on the royal bloodline. Lord Ashford grabbed the physician by the collar. You'll recant. You'll say she forced you. I'll do no such thing. Morholt squeaked. I'll confess everything to save my own neck. Silence him. Ashford roared. 2 guards moved forward, then stopped, uncertain. Who did they serve? The king who'd been exposed? The queen whose child wasn't royal? The allied lords who were already reconsidering their oaths? The throne room teetered on the edge of violence. Enough. Thalira's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. Every eye turned to her. "This ceremony," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "is a farce. This throne is built on corruption. These alliances are founded on lies." She looked directly at Corvain, still kneeling, and her voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. "I came here because you commanded it. You wanted to humiliate me. To show me what I'd lost." She gestured to her children. "Instead, I've shown you what you lost. And unlike you, I'm not interested in games or politics or empty crowns." She turned toward the doors. "I'm leaving. With my children. With my dignity. And with the future of the Stormridge bloodline." "Thalira," Corvain's voice broke. She stopped. Looked back over her shoulder. "Goodbye, Corvain." And then she did the unthinkable. She turned her back on the kneeling Alpha King. And walked away. The gasp that went through the court was audible even in the corridor outside. To turn your back on an Alpha King, especially one on his knees before you, was the ultimate rejection. The ultimate humiliation. It was a statement that would be remembered for generations. Thalira Embervale, the rejected mate, had rejected her king in return. And she'd done it in front of the entire alliance. Guards parted before her like water. No one dared stop her. Julian and his warriors formed up around her, a protective escort that declared her untouchable. As they crossed the threshold, Mirael looked back once. Corvain was still on his knees, surrounded by chaos, his hands still extended toward the family that would never be his. "Mama?" Mirael whispered. "He's crying." "I know," Thalira said softly. "Do you feel bad?" Thalira was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, little flame. I don't." Behind them, the throne room of Stormridge Citadel descended into political warfare. But Thalira didn't look back again. She'd spent 6 years surviving what Corvain had done to her. She wouldn't spend another second caring about his pain. The Ashenwood Alpha walked out into the mountain air, her children beside her, her head held high. And in that moment, history changed forever. Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles for Chapter 6. Comment Queen if you think Thalira just became the most powerful wolf in the mountains. Will he accept defeat, or will he do something desperate? The gates of Stormridge Citadel closed behind them with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Thalira walked through the courtyard, past the assembled dignitaries who had come to witness a celebration and instead witnessed a revolution. Her children flanked her, Kaelen on her right, Mirael on her left, their small hands gripping hers tightly. Julian's warriors formed a protective circle around them, shields raised, weapons ready. But no one moved to stop them. Guards stood frozen at their posts, unsure of their orders, unsure of their loyalties. Visiting Alphas watched in silence, their faces calculating the political earthquake they'd just experienced. And Thalira walked through it all like a queen departing a conquered kingdom. No one dared touch her. No one dared speak. They simply watched as the rejected mate, the woman they'd all dismissed as powerless and broken, walked away carrying the future of Stormridge in her hands. When they reached the tree line where the Ashenwood escort waited, Thalira finally allowed herself to breathe. "Mama," Mirael whispered, looking back at the citadel. "I can still feel him. He's breaking." "I know," Thalira said softly. "But that's not our burden to carry anymore." Kaelen said nothing, but his jaw was set, his young face already learning the weight of choices and consequences. They mounted up, the entire procession turning toward home, toward safety, toward the forest that had protected them when the kingdom had tried to destroy them. As they rode away, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering their tracks. Inside Stormridge Citadel, the throne room had emptied. Nobles fled to their quarters. Guards dispersed in confusion. Allied alphas gathered in corners, whispering urgently about alliances, about loyalty, about what came next. Queen Alara had been escorted to her chambers, screaming accusations. Lady Ashford was under guard. Physician Morholt had been dragged to the dungeons. And Corvain Stormridge stood alone in the vast throne room, staring at the doors his mate and children had walked through. His hands trembled. His breath came in ragged gasps. The mate bond, broken, bleeding, desperate, screamed inside him like a living thing. She was alive. She'd been alive this entire time. And he'd missed 6 years of his children's lives because he'd been too proud, too ambitious, too stupid to question a convenient lie. Something inside him snapped. He grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it across the room. It shattered against a pillar. Then another. And another. "Your Majesty," a guard began, rushing in. "Get out!" Corvain roared, his voice shaking the stones. The guard fled. Corvain turned to his throne, the seat of power he'd sacrificed everything to secure, and he hated it. Hated every inch of gold and iron. Hated what it represented. Hated what it had cost him. He drew his sword and brought it down on the armrest with a sound like thunder. Again. And again. And again. Until the ancient throne bore the scars of his fury. He collapsed to his knees, the sword clattering from his grip, and roared his anguish to the empty hall. The mate bond twisted inside him, reaching for Thalira, finding only distance and rejection. Lord Greythorn appeared in the doorway, his face grave. "The council demands an audience," he said quietly. "The alliances are fracturing. 3 packs have already withdrawn their oaths. The Ashford family is calling for—" "I don't care," Corvain said, his voice hoarse and deadly. "I don't care about the alliances. I don't care about the council. I don't care about any of it." He stood slowly, his golden eyes burning with something between madness and determination. "She took my children," he said quietly. "My heirs. The mate the goddess chose for me. Everything that should have been mine. Your Majesty, with respect, you rejected." "I know what I did," Corvain roared. "And I will spend every day for the rest of my life fixing it." He turned to face Greythorn fully, and the Lord took an involuntary step backward at what he saw in the king's face. "Summon the generals," Corvain said coldly. "Recall every garrison. I want eyes on the Ashenwood territory. I want intelligence on Julian Thorne's movements. I want everything." "Your Majesty, you can't be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Corvain interrupted. "I'm declaring it. I will reclaim my heirs. I will reclaim my mate. I will reclaim the destiny I threw away." He grabbed his sword from the floor. "And I will tear down every alliance, every pack, every wolf that stands between me and my family." His voice dropped to something quiet and absolutely lethal. "This isn't over. Not even close." Far ahead, on the forest road, Julian rode beside Thalira's wagon. The snow fell heavier now, and the temperature had dropped. They'd make camp soon, but for now, distance was more important than comfort. "You know he won't let this go," Julian said quietly. "Corvain isn't the type to accept defeat." Thalira stared ahead at the dark forest, her expression unreadable. "I know," she said simply. "He'll come for you. For the twins. He'll use every resource, every soldier, every political favor he has left." "I know," Thalira repeated, her voice steady. Julian studied her profile, the strong jaw, the determined eyes, the woman who had survived 6 years of exile and emerged stronger than the king who'd tried to destroy her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Thalira was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, cold, dangerous, and absolutely fearless. "Let him come," she said softly. "I survived his rejection. I survived the forest. I survived alone with 2 newborns and nothing but will and rage to sustain me." She looked at Julian, and her moonstone eyes burned like ice on fire. "He will come for us," she said. "And we will be ready." At Stormridge Citadel, Corvain stood on the balcony of his chambers, watching the snow fall over the mountains. Somewhere out there, beyond the peaks and valleys, Thalira was disappearing into the wilderness with his children. The true heirs. The family he should have protected, should have cherished, should have known existed. The mate bond ached in his chest like an open wound. But this time, he wouldn't ignore it. This time, he wouldn't let pride dictate his choices. This time, he would fight for what was his, not because of power or politics or alliances. But because somewhere in the wreckage of his arrogance, he'd realized something terrifying. He'd never stopped loving her. The wind carried her scent, faint, distant, already fading. Corvain's hands gripped the stone railing until his knuckles went white. "Thalira," he whispered into the cold mountain air, his voice carrying on the wind like a vow. "I'm coming for my family." The snow fell harder. The storm was just beginning. And in the darkness of the Frostveil Forest, the Ashenwood Wolves disappeared into the trees, carrying with them the future of a kingdom. But destiny, once rejected, doesn't return easily. And some battles are only just beginning. If you believe mates should never be thrown away and children deserve to know their father only if he's worthy, hit that subscribe button to Silver Moon Chronicles right now. Only people who think rejection and lies are acceptable won't subscribe. Comment "Destiny doesn't forget" if you know Corvain is about to face the consequences of every choice he made. The story continues, and you won't want to miss what happens when a desperate king goes to war for the family he destroyed.
Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of Thalira's story. Honestly, it means the world to me that you watched her journey. From broken and rejected to powerful and unstoppable. If this story touched your heart even a little bit, then I promise you the next one will completely blow your mind. It's even crazier, more emotional, and so full of twists you won't believe it. I poured everything into it, and I can't wait for you to experience it. Please don't just scroll away. Click on that video showing on your screen right now. Let's continue this journey together. I don't want you to miss it, I really don't. And one more thing before you go. I notice some of you beautiful souls have been watching quietly, and I just want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Seriously, drop your city or country in the comments. Let me know you're real. Let me know you're here with me. It would mean so much to see your name, to know that this story reached you, wherever you are in the world. So please subscribe if you haven't already, click that next video, and leave me a comment telling me where you're from. I read every single one. I see you. And I'm so grateful you're here. Now go, your next story is waiting. And trust me, you're going to love it.